Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the world. I am your host, Matt Bowers, and recently, Brother Maynard Edwards sat down and had a chat with something that has a pretty close relationship to Freemasonry, at least in its philosophical teachings, and that is with the idea of Stoicism, specifically centered around the teachings of the greats such as Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. And Brother Daniel Molina, 32nd degree of the Scottish Rite Valley of Miami, recently did a presentation called Hiramic Meditations, How Freemasonry Crafts a Stoic Lifestyle. And when we found out about this, Brother Maynard wanted to sit down and have a chat with him as to how these two relate to one another. So, without taking up any further time with introductions, you should be listening to this conversation because it really sheds some very cool light on the relationship between Stoicism and Freemasonry. So here's that chat between Brother Maynard Edwards and Brother Daniel Molina.
How you doing, brother? Good to meet you. I appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, this is definitely an honor.
Let's start at the beginning, if we can, and just give us a little bit about your Masonic background and
some of my Masonic background. Okay, so I was raised in November of 2016. I'm a past master of my lodge, so Hibiscus Lodge, Castro's Lodge, in 2020 and 2021. I was fortunate enough to have the COVID years, which we know were very peaceful times.
Sure.
So I was fortunate
especially in Florida. Hey,
exactly. Yeah. Well, we're talking about Stoicism, right?
Right.
So and this is where a lot of that came from. So I served 2020, 2021. When Castro actually became our district deputy, he appointed me to take the position that he had before, which is the Masonic Education Chairman for the district. So pretty much, I'm the Grand Lodge of Florida offers three different Masonic education programs. I'm in charge of two of them, and then also for the Grand Lodge of Florida last year appointed me, and this year to be the Zone 7 Chairman of Masonic Leadership Training. It's just a program where you're teaching the officers what their roles are, how to run an effective lodge. So and I'm in charge of West Palm Beach all the way down to the Keys. So I'm very, very happy when it comes to that. When it comes to some of the bodies that I'm a member of Valley of Miami. I'm a member of the Grotto over here. I am an advisor at large for DeMolay. And I'm actually going to be helping the DeMolay here bring in some Spanish working chapters. So that's something that we're working on. I'm a member of the Royal Arch, the Council. I'm a member of AMD. It's very cool because the AMD Council that I'm a member of is bilingual. So we can do presentations in both English and Spanish. So it's really cool to be able to be part of that. And I just do lectures across the state sometimes. I mean, I've been invited to California to give lectures, so I'm involved in Masonic education. So that's a little bit of
that's not a little. You've had a busy eight and a half years or so since walking in the door. And the thing that brought you to my attention was a talk that you gave to the brothers in the Orient of Nebraska. On what they have a program they call the Lyceum that they do every couple of weeks. It's an online presentation. It's really great. And they had me come a couple of weeks ago. And then I saw that you were up shortly after me, and I wanted to catch your presentation, and I wasn't available for it. So I thought, well, why not vulgar abuse of podcast power and get you just to kind of come do one directly for us. So your topic was one that I have often wanted to explore a lot more deeply, and that's Stoicism and Freemasonry, because I think there is a ton of overlap between Stoic philosophy and, if nothing else, the lesson of the compass and the square. In terms of keeping our passions in due bounds, being that square of truth and virtue. So tell us a little bit about let's start here. How do you define Stoicism to someone who is not sure really what that means?
So if I was going to give just like a very quick just definition to define a very broad school of thought, I would say that it is an ancient school of thought that teaches you how to develop self-control to be able to overcome destructive emotions. So that's probably the best way that I would define it.
And it comes to us, as you said, an ancient philosophy that comes to us from a few different writers. The one that immediately jumps to mind for most people, they might have even grabbed this one in high school, is Marcus Aurelius and his writings in meditation. But there's also Epictetus, and I'm probably saying some of the names wrong, and you know, a bunch more. Yes, so a bunch more. So how do you connect Stoicism to Freemasonry? Because I see them really, really close together in terms of human behavior.
So just to give you a little bit of information on how I developed this presentation that I've done, it was in 2020 that I first picked up Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Essentially, it's just a book of 12 different books, journal entries that he was working on while he was the emperor of Rome. And it's in those books that he's essentially questioning and going over different questions that we ourselves ask ourselves, and that Freemasonry encourages us to ask ourselves. What is the nature of reality? What is how can we control our emotions? How can we live a more virtuous life? What comes after death? Things like that. And it was in reading his passages that I started to notice some connections, not only in the philosophy that he was espousing, but also in the philosophy that Freemasonry teaches us. Because that was one of the things that I found that I wanted to do, was present Freemasonry as a school of thought. Obviously, we can define Freemasonry through many different ways, and we can approach it through different vantage points. But to me, I think that you can say that Freemasonry is a school of thought. And it was in looking at some of the Stoic concepts and how they were expressed in Freemasonry that I thought that maybe the synthesis of this presentation, it would be effective. And just to share one of them, the Stoics talk about the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum. And what that translates to is the premeditation of evils. And in the Meditations, Marcus Aurelius writes to himself and he tells himself, one of the things that you should do when you wake up is immediately think about how evil people can be. People are going to be treacherous. They're going to be malicious. They're going to betray you. They're going to be combative. And this really isn't to be morbid, right? Or to kind of have a bad start to your day, but it's actually to jumpstart your day and to prepare yourself rationally and how you can approach the day should any of these things happen. The connection that I make in the presentation is viewing the Hiramic legend as a cautionary tale. And what I mean by that is obviously not to get into any of the details, but we know that there are three figures in the Hiramic legend, but we need to remind ourselves that these three figures are brothers as well. They're not just some random people that entered the story that wanted to attain some information that wasn't entitled to them. And I think that in reflecting on the Hiramic legend as a cautionary tale, we ourselves as Masons can think about not only the bad things that are going to happen to us, that other people might do to us, but also the bad that we can do to ourselves or even to our own brothers. And I think that that's something that I've highlighted now during this time, because obviously the country is very divided when it comes to the presidential election. And we probably have a lot of brothers on Facebook who are eviscerating each other. And I think that is a perfect example of seeing how brothers can quickly turn into ruffians. And it's not only being ruffians against each other, but also against the fraternity as a whole, because then if other people are also viewing that type of activity from us on social media, what kind of shadow are we casting over the fraternity as a whole? Especially if you're a prospective candidate, I think to myself, if I was not in the fraternity, is this something that I would want to be a part of? Are these people that I would want to sit down with and learn from? So that's one of the connections that I would make between Freemasonry and Stoicism.
Yeah, and I think that it leads directly to, like I said at the start here, the study of the compass and the square in particular, and even to also obviously the volume of Sacred Law or Holy Bible, whichever book you choose to place in that space. Freemasonry does a great job of giving us the advice that we need to keep our passions within due bounds. We need to control our emotions. Just like the compass, we need to stay connected to the center to be who we are and think, we need to follow that square of truth and virtue. Masonry does a really good job of giving that good advice, but it doesn't offer specifics as to how to control your passions. It doesn't offer you specifics as to how to deal with those day-to-day things. So I think when you delve into high degree Masonry, you get into Scottish Rite, you get into some of the York Rite lessons. Even if you've ever seen the actual shrine degree from the Shriners, it goes a little more in depth as to puts a little meat on the bone, if you will, into terms of how you do that. But the Stoics, they're not addressed specifically in our Scottish Rite lessons, but the Stoic philosophy is definitely within that of controlling your own thoughts, your own emotions, and that you have to take charge of what you can take charge of. You can't control the wind, you can't control your sails. And that, can you talk a little bit about specifics in terms of you mentioned the one of meditation. I literally every morning when I wake up and I'm in bed and I hit the snooze more than I need to, I think of another one of Marcus Aurelius's quotes, and I'm paraphrasing here, where he says, every living creature from the bees to beasts of the field, when the morning comes, they wake up and they get going. What right do you have to stay in bed and stay asleep? You play a part in the world just like they do. They're up doing what they're supposed to be doing. You have no right to not do the same. And I think of that every time I hit the snooze. And then I hit the snooze and go back to sleep for another 9 minutes. And I remind myself to send the bees a note later and apologize for my tardiness. But are there other meditations or other, from Seneca, as you mentioned, that you see as an overlap?
Well, it was Epictetus who gives us so Epictetus was an individual that was very much like Socrates. He didn't believe in having to write down any of his teachings, any of his lectures. And the only reason why we have any of his thoughts at all is because of his student Arian, who felt that he was, him being Epictetus, that he was as important of a teacher as Socrates was. So this is where we get two of these texts, like the Enchiridion, which just translates to the handbook, and then his discourses. Now, the Enchiridion, or the Stoics Enchiridion, however way you want to see it, I think it's very important because it's very much like a manual for better living. A manual that gives you 52 aphorisms on how you should live your life. And it's in the first aphorism that we get what we know of as the dichotomy of control. So it essentially teaches you some things are in your control and some things are out of your control. The Stoic concept that I would tie it to is amor fati. Amor fati being loving your fate. And we can directly see this in the tessellated floor of the lodge, right? And one of the things that I talk about in the presentation is that there's a change in character that's accepted on the tessellated floor. You take your obligation on the tessellated floor. You can't take it anywhere else. And we are taught that the tessellated floor has the black and the white because it is there to remind us of the good and the bad that is constantly in our life, right? And I think that this is something that not only in Masonic lore, if we want to look at Masonic lore, but also the Stoics as well used, because the concept of amor fati and loving your fate, what the Stoics were doing was telling themselves whether something is quote unquote good or bad, it is working towards your improvement, right? If there's an obstacle that you have overcome, then now after you get over that obstacle, now that you can overcome it. Right? You have gained lessons, you have gained knowledge from having to overcome that obstacle. And obviously in Freemasonry, there are many obstacles, especially if you go through the Scottish Rite degrees, there are a lot of obstacles that you have to overcome in the stories. I think of the 15th degree, the Knight of the East of the Sword or of the Eagle, where essentially, Zerubbabel is like this courageous character who is overcoming an obstacle by remaining calm, right? Remaining calm and not being combative, even though, obviously this king has been combative towards him, and ultimately what he's able to gain is so much more than if he had responded in the same way. So I don't know if that answers the question.
And we do see Zerubbabel work that out in real time. He's presented with the temptation of gold and all the various the Ark of the Covenant. He's presented with all these things, so his passions are tested, and he works that out in real time and says, I'm stopping myself. So you see him make that conscious decision. It's a great observation that happens.
And the lesson of that degree is essentially transmuting trials into victories.
Sure.
So even then it's, you're faced with an obstacle that doesn't have to defeat you. You can work through it, you can work around it, and then you'll be able to come out of the other side better than you thought you ever could.
You can only experience triumph if you are faced with challenges. So you only have the opportunity to overcome and to grow if you are tested. And that's the mental way of looking at it. But nature does this constantly. What's the way to build your muscles? To lift heavy things. Which we've all been at the gym and been like, I hate this. This is the worst thing ever. But you do it and you feel the improvement and you see that change over time. So only as we are under pressure do we get to improve. Do you think Stoicism necessarily means that a person or a man or a Mason has to be, what's the right word here? Cold, for lack of a better word, cold. Do you think it could make someone devoid of emotion? Is there a point at which Stoicism maybe goes too far?
I think that there is a point where Stoicism does go too far, because you even notice in Epictetus's teachings, or even in Marcus Aurelius's teachings, where Epictetus will say, at the end of the day, if you kiss your child, know that your child will possibly die one day, and you have to be okay with that. Obviously, that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
We all know that at one point our time is going to be up, but that doesn't make it any easier to deal with, especially with. So I think that when it comes to certain things like that, it can even be destructive, right? Counterproductive. So I do think that it can get to that point. And I think that right now in kind of this resurgence that Stoicism is having, especially when it comes with more business oriented areas, I think that is also a place where maybe some people might miss the point of what some of these teachings are supposed to teach us.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point about Stoicism and business, and I know that there are a couple of different YouTubers that push this concept, and there are some new writings on this that people are using, to treat business more as business. And I think Stoicism and business makes a lot of sense. But as you rightly point out, in a family situation, there's a tipping point where it's like, okay, that's too far. You don't kiss your kid goodnight and say, hey, daddy could die tonight, so just want to make sure you're prepared for tomorrow. now the kid's not going to sleep ever. So, and that type of thing. So why do you think there is this resurgence and interest in Stoic philosophy? And do you think that resurgence will lead to, more people knocking on lodge doors, looking for that same, keeping your passions within due bounds?
When it comes to the first one, why do I think that there's been a resurgence and people are pursuing this? I think it's because we're seeing how people are responding to material things, whereas people might be able to attain a certain role, a certain title, certain riches, but they're finding that it's not as fulfilling as possibly maybe even conquering themselves. And I think that this has been the age-old adage, right? Know thyself. Wanting to know yourself, wanting to quote unquote conquer yourself. And I think that especially when you go to the pandemic, because in 2020, there were studies that were even shown that there was an uptick in people buying the meditations. And I think it was because now you were presented with a moment that not only was disastrous on a global scale, but also it caused people to have to face themselves. and possibly have difficult conversations that maybe they weren't prepared to have before, and now they had to have it. So people are possibly even more aware of themselves than they were before. And I think that this is something that maybe will cause more people to knock on Freemasonry's door, because Freemasonry is a lot of things, but also it is, to me, as I mentioned, it is a school of thought that teaches you how to find your way to moral and intellectual perfection. And I think that that's something, especially now in the times that we're living in, where there's a lot of, you hear the word postmodernism being thrown around, there's no meaning, there's no structure, there's nothing. I think that people are looking for order within the chaos. And I think that Freemasonry does provide that without being overbearing, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that we do live in this age where feelings get amplified to the nth degree, because it used to be, if you had a feeling, if you were having a bad day, if someone hurt your feelings, you could tell 4 or 5 people in your immediate vicinity, and that would be that. If several of them would console you, 1 or 2 wouldn't care, and that would be that. And you would be left to deal with it on your own, and that's the end of it. Now we live in this era where if someone steps on your toe, someone offends you in some form or fashion, you now would go and then post about that feeling online, and the entire world can weigh in on your feeling, and they can end up amplifying these feelings to the point that it makes a literal mountain out of a molehill. And I think that there are those of us, I definitely am one of them. I suspect you probably are too. I know Matt Bowers is. He hates everything. Is we're all tired of that amplification of small things that become these big things, because people are just not keeping their passions within due bounds. And I'm talking about non-Masons as well as Masons. And we see brothers attacking brothers because they've got that, their feelings are being amplified by this online forum, and they're semi-detached from the reality of being in the same space with the person that has hurt their feelings, if you will. So, I think people are looking for that break from this constant deluge of emotion all day, every day that we're, that's literally in our hand constantly. And I'm as guilty as anybody, but so that I know that's one of the things that attracts me, not only to Stoicism, but to Freemasonry as well. It's like, a little bit of a chill pill, if you will.
Yeah, ultimately, and this is what I find very beautiful, is that the Stoics talk about life as being a constant struggle between vice and virtue. And I think that, so after when you're initiated, right, you're taught that to build an edifice, you place the cornerstone in the northeast corner, and it is directly placed between the north and the east. Now, the north, we're taught, is a place of darkness, which we can equate to vice, ignorance. And then the east is the place where the Worshipful Master resides. It's the pillar of wisdom. We can equate it to enlightenment. And so from the beginning, you are, the impression is made that you are in the middle between dark and light, vice and virtue. And I think that that's a beautiful thing to reflect on.
Excellent point. I hadn't really considered it in that manner. I will have to steal that from you at some point in time. It's that is an excellent point. So, what now? I know how and when you kind of got into this Stoic philosophy. What drew you to it personally? Was there something personal in your life that you went through? You mentioned your time in the East. Was there a specific thing that you needed to learn how to deal with, or just a general curiosity about these great writers and philosophers in history?
So I'll give you a couple of different answers, because I think that I can approach it through different dimensions.
Sure.
So the most basic answer is, at my lodge, before we have our stated meeting, we always put on a presentation for prospective candidates and brothers. And it could be on a wide variety of topics. So each month a different brother will speak. And it just so happened that on that month, the brother that was supposed to speak wasn't able to speak because he was having some personal issues. So I found myself in a situation where now I need to either call another brother and see if he is able to give a presentation, or just remove it outright. And since I already had an interest in Stoicism, I figured, well, I'm noticing connections between Stoicism and Freemasonry. Why not just do a presentation myself? So that was that. From another perspective, since I already mentioned, and we know that it was a very difficult moment, I was also Worshipful Master at 26 years old. So I was thinking to myself, well, now I'm Worshipful Master and I'm presiding over a lodge of brothers that, are very successful, very knowledgeable, older in their years. What could I possibly teach them? And it was in doing a deep dive into some Stoic texts that I found that it was okay for them to be able to learn from me and for me to be able to learn from them. Marcus Aurelius actually held Epictetus in high regard, and he considered him his own Socrates, and Epictetus was a slave. His name Epictetus translates to acquired. We don't even know what his name is. So I think that it's a beautiful thing that Stoicism was accepting individuals from all walks of life, all different types of backgrounds. They were all learning from each other, and Freemasonry provides the same platform for the initiate to be able to come in and learn from different people. So in a way, it also helped me deal with the fact that I didn't have to come in with any insecurities of possibly being 26 years old and being overlooked because of my age. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, it does. And you make an excellent point, that as, younger men coming into Masonry, you always fear like some of these older guys have got so much more experience. Are they going to be welcoming? Are they going to hear my ideas? Are they going to listen to what I have to say? Am I going to be valued in this environment? And that's definitely a concern. I think a lot of men, especially men who strive towards going into that Oriental chair, when you walk in and you realize, you've got dark hair and they've all got gray hair or no hair. In some cases, it's both. There's part of you that goes, these guys are not going to listen to me. But generally speaking, I would say to a man, most Masons know that the master is the master, and it doesn't matter. He had to do what he had to do to get there, and it doesn't matter whether he's 26 as you were, or if he was, much more experienced. The rules are the rules, and I think that is a good thing about Freemasonry. Do you have a sort of a go-to? Besides, obviously, the meditations is the one that everybody kind of clings to. It's the one that when you think Stoic philosophy, if you only know a little bit about it, that's what you go to. Is there something in that speaks to you sort of on a daily basis that you use as guiding principles, if you will?
So the thing that would immediately come to mind is there's a passage in there which is along the lines of the soul is colored by or is dyed with the color of your thoughts. And I think that's a beautiful thing because it also brings in mindfulness into thought, where a lot of times, and I believe it was also even Seneca who said sometimes we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. So I think that especially when you're presented with a problem, your mind immediately jumps to the worst horrible things that could possibly happen. And I think that it's in remembering that passage that I think to myself, you know what, most likely this thing is not going to happen. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That's probably the most important passage that I would think, I think about on a daily basis.
One of the things about the Stoics that speaks to me, and again, I think I'm swiping this whole cloth from the meditations, is that this concept of that, and we're in the West, we're real big on this, the concept of credit and blame. When something goes sideways, we're always looking for someone to blame. And when things go well, we're always looking to take credit. And truth be told, we probably are doing ourselves a little bit of disservice doing either one, because if we're blaming people, we're not really focusing on the problem. We're just wanting to hang it on somebody. Whereas, if we're trying to take credit for something, we're discounting all the other factors that went into our successes. And you shouldn't do that either. And you talked very well about that balance between vice and virtue. I look at that similar dance between blame and credit. And in Masonry, we get real into something has gone wrong in lodge. Well, it's that guy's fault. Or it's, well, I did this and I want full credit for having accomplished this thing. And really, I think that ends up becoming so toxic within our walls. Do you, what are your thoughts on that those principles, taking that virtue and vice concept to the next level, if you will?
So two things. One, I would just direct everyone to the beehive. We're taught that the beehive is a symbol of industry, and especially if we're talking about the lodge, all brothers are responsible for the successes of the lodge, and in contrast, the failures of the lodge. So that's something that I always like to think about. It's the beehive. Everybody plays a role. Everybody has a part, and ultimately, the responsibility is on all of us to be able to move not only the lodge forward, but we're all ambassadors of Freemasonry as a whole. So it gets bigger and bigger as you get this, what the Stoics talk about, the bird's eye view of it all. So I would mention that. And then there's another passage in the Meditations where Marcus Aurelius reminds himself that his purple robe, is nothing but dried shellfish blood. And I think that that's so important, because here is the most important man in Rome at the time who is, reminding himself, hey, this robe that I've attained is just dried shellfish blood. That's all it is. There are more important things at play that I could be doing than just sitting around and calling myself an emperor and reveling in the title. And this is why we're also told that in the lodge there's no higher title than brother, right? So you could be a past master, you could be a past district deputy, grand master, whatever the case may be, but at the end of the day, we're all brothers. So whether or not you call me worshipful, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we're brothers. So those are two things that I would direct brothers to think about.
Yeah, and I'm sure and you've got a bunch of titles yourself, and I likewise, and I run into this from time to time with, you need to write down all your titles. I really would rather not. I really would rather just be brother and be done with it. If you want to throw a 33rd after my name, all right, great. I'm an advisor for Job's Daughters, and I love the Masonic youth groups, and I love my Joby girls, all of them. My daughters are involved. But when we go to different places, they always want to introduce me, and they're like, please write down all of your titles. And I've gotten to the point where I won't write them down anymore. And I put in a fake name so that they just because at some point you can't take it too seriously, because you're doing yourself a I'm a Kentucky colonel, which I do like to work in a conversation when I can, but it's a joke. It's not a real thing. You can't take all of those things too seriously, because at the end of the day, in Maryland, it's in our senior warden's charge during the installation. The wisest knows not when that great leveler is going to come, and the only thing that will matter is how we behaved while we were here. So those titles, those virtues, that robe with the shellfish blood, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful interaction between Marcus Aurelius and his advisors. It's said that at the end of his life, when he was already going to die, his top advisors were around his deathbed, and they were freaking out about what was going to happen. They're like, oh man, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? And he basically says, the sun is setting on me. You guys need to move on. And I think that's very beautiful, especially when you see him wanting to, or kind of becoming this philosopher king. I think it's a beautiful end to his life and what he thought was virtuous and important.
So if brothers are interested in taking their own look at Stoicism and Stoic philosophies, and I know that's a big rabbit hole to get down, do you recommend that they start with the Meditations, or would you have a better jumping off point?
I think that the Meditations is a perfect place to start, because it's essentially where I started as well. I would also mention Epictetus, so his discourses and his Enchiridion. I would point to the works of Massimo Pigliocci, specifically his book, How to Be a Stoic. And then also, probably the most easily digestible is Ryan Holiday's works, because what he's doing in his works is essentially tying in ancient Stoic thought to contemporary examples, so kind of applying how different presidents have probably been able to express some Stoic thought, celebrities, musicians, things like that.
He's a big YouTuber as well, so you can usually find him pretty easily. I've seen some of his stuff, and he was on Rogan not too long ago, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on Rogan. And then also, if you want to go into YouTube, something that's really cool is for the past couple of years, there's been a StoicCon. So a lot of different scholars and authors have been able to present at Stoicon, and their presentations are also on YouTube. So you can check it out.
Thinking, Stoicon, the music and food must suck. It's just so bring a bag lunch and your headphones, but other than that, it's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
That's a terrible thing to say, but was just thinking about, no salt of any kind. Well, I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me about this. I'm hoping that, if you've got some other presentations, we can talk to you about these. But for folks who are looking to get in touch with you and maybe have you do a presentation for them, because I find this to be, like I said earlier, I think that Masonry does such a good job of giving that advice of keeping our passions due bound, following that square of truth and virtue, but it falls apart in some step-by-step how-tos. And I think that Stoicism provides a lot of that. And even to the extent of our 32nd degree and the royal secret of equilibrium, I think Stoicism absolutely, puts that meat on the bone of how to do that in your life. Not just say, hey, live with equilibrium, which is what the Scottish Rite degrees do. It actually gives you that specifics on it.
Yeah, not only the specifics, but it also shows you that these individuals have been practicing this, and not only practicing it, these are the results that they've gotten. So I think that it also provides that for the reader to be able to say, oh, okay, so this is how it should go for me as well.
Well, if brothers want to get in touch with you and have you speak to them, what's the best way to do that?
You can go on Facebook. My name is Daniel Molina. You can check me out on Instagram @_BruceDwayne. And then if you want to shoot me an email, you can send me an email at dmolina6016@gmail.com.
Well, and if you're in Southern Florida and you get a chance to visit a lodge, there's a better than fair chance you're going to run into Brother Daniel somewhere. It sounds like he gets around pretty good. So you work in the Keys?
No, I'm actually in the Little Havana area. So my lodge, Hibiscus, meets at the Miami Scottish Rite Temple.
Yeah, but you said that in terms of education, your territory goes down to the Keys.
Yeah, from West Palm Beach all the way down to the Keys.
Okay, 'cause, I've been in the Key West Lodge a couple of times. Their Blue Lodge there, and I'm friends with a bunch of the guys that are the Key West brothers. If the Key West brothers show up to to one of our conferences, I always tell people, if you sit down and have a beer with them, don't try and outlast those guys. You are not going to win. It's just not going to happen. Because Matt and myself, we were in a band for a long, long time, and we played down at Sloppy Joe's a bunch of times and over the years. And I would always make it a point to visit with those guys. And they're wonderful brothers. And I think most of my tattoos were done at Paradise Tattoo there on Duval Street, which is owned by Brother Greg Eppy, who is he's a Scottish Rite Mason, past Venerable Master of the Valley. And so I have a great fondness for that area of the world. And so anything you do for those guys, please pass on my well wishes.
Definitely will do.
So, well, thanks, man, so much for everything. And if ever you're up this way or you got something going on you want to talk about, give us a shout. We'd love to chat with you again.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, thank you so much for letting me be here. It's definitely an honor.
A huge thanks to Brother Daniel Molina for taking the time out of a very busy Masonic schedule to share the relationship between Stoicism and Freemasonry. I am sure it is a topic we will cover in other formats here, either through a podcast or maybe, I don't know, something on a learning platform. But either way, thank you again for listening to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the world. I am your host, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and we will see you again here at the Tyler's Place.